I should be going in here, right? Oh, god damn it! Oh shit. No. Bendy and the Ink Machine is a first-person action horror game released in 2018 by Joey Drew Studios, an indie studio created by Paul Crawford, better known as The Meatly. He and a programming friend by the name of Mike Mood started working on Bendy in 2016, and to no one's surprise, it was an instant success. Given that this was released after Five Nights at Freddy's had become a household name,
see you on the flip side.
A horror game based on the art style of the classic Disney era of cartoons was a no-brainer. Joey Drew Studios isn't named after a game developer, no. Joey Drew is quite literally Walt Disney. And Bendy is his Mickey Mouse. You play as Henry Stein, a former animator and business partner at Joey Drew Studios who left the studio over a few disagreements that he had with Joey. Henry received a letter from Joey asking him to come visit the studio 30 years later, and this is where the game starts.
All right, Joey, I'm here. Let's see if we can find what you wanted me to see.
The first thing you may have noticed, and the main selling point, is the art style. It's very much inspired by and akin to the Steamboat Willie and Betty Boop era of cartoons. The main difference here is that the colors mainly used aren't black and white, but rather black and various shades of brown and sepia. It gives the game its own unique look and feel while also being functional in a horror title. Instead of black and white that you would see in a classic cartoon, it's mainly this dingy brown color. Most importantly, this color choice highlights how old and decrepit the studio is. I'd imagine that while Joey Drew Studios was in its prime, these walls and surfaces were white, and as it aged and became more dilapidated, it browned and crumpled like newspaper. Everything in the game has this style too, from weapons and items to even characters you meet along the way. Before I get into what's wrong with the sound, I'll get into what's right with it first. Joey Drew Studios serves multiple purposes. Not only is it an animation studio, but it's also a toy factory, and was on the way of making its own version of Disneyland. In all of these areas, you're bound to hear some sort of machinery in the background. All of this is well and good. My main gripe with it, however, is that it's so scarce that it's simply not effective. How scarce, you might ask? Most of the game is like this. No droning ambience, creaking floorboards, or hardly anything at all. A majority of ambient sounds are found in hallways like this. Just a small area for you to enjoy the sounds, and that's it. Some of you may say that at least you can hear the footsteps of enemies more clearly, which is a fair point, but I'll get into enemies in a bit and into why most of the time it doesn't matter. So surely without much ambient sounds and things going on in the background, the music fills those gaps, right? Wrong. The music here, for lack of a better term, is absent. It does exist, but it fails to really cause tension and apprehensiveness when exploring. I replayed most of the game just to confirm that I'm not gaslighting myself into thinking it barely played at all. It's mainly present either when a set piece happens, or when actively running away from an enemy. It can be bombastic and oppressive when it needs to be, which is really good, but it's used so ineffectively and so little that it genuinely feels like it's only present when there's an active threat chasing you. Nailing music buildup and tone is the hardest thing you can do in a horror title, and here they just missed the mark. Coupled with the lack of ambient sounds the game has, it's almost too quiet. I'm of the mindset that sometimes less music is better, but with the lack of ambient effects on top of that, it makes some environments feel dull. The lack of music wouldn't be so bad if the ambience of those machines in the studio were more present. It's a tough balance, and I feel bad for harping on an indie studio for doing this poorly, but there's no way someone somewhere in development didn't say that this is too quiet. If you think I'm asking too much, Filter, a game made by a solo dev, had more going on than Bendy does. As I said before, Joey Drew Studios presents itself as an animation studio, but as you explore, you learn of other things that this studio is capable of. Manufacturing toys, having an in-house audio production suite, and they were even on their way to making an amusement park. Which is all well and good, but it's not executed well at all. What do I mean by that? Well, let me explain. The toy manufacturing level really only has 1 or 2 areas where you see toys lined up on a shelf or in production. The rest of the level is just generic office space or what feels like could have been an entirely different level. Instead of going through a warehouse attached to a toy factory with raw materials, conveyor belts, and assembly areas, we get one tiny room to attempt to convey it all, and it just doesn't work. You'll find that most levels, except for the theme park level, don't feel fully realized, which is a shame because they could have gotten a lot harder with enemy variety. Changing models to different cartoon characters per level would have been a nice touch, but no, you get the same type of enemies throughout the entire game. Speaking of enemies, let's get into dealing with them. At first, Bendy makes it seem like this will be another defenseless horror game, which I personally believe to be the best of horror experiences. Not being able to defend yourself, using distraction techniques, and absolutely booking it when you fuck up is truly the most horrifying experience you can have. All of that goes out the window when you're given an axe and are reenacting Hatchet. The regular enemies aren't really an obstacle, they just mindlessly hobble towards you. This takes away all of what little tension the game was building, since now there's really no indestructible threat. Now there are some areas where you're stripped of your weapons and have to use your wits to progress around enemies, until you find out you can flat out exploit the AI. I didn't discover this until towards the end of the game, but once I did, all sense of horror I felt was just gone. It's easy just to run past everything, hide, wait for them to leave, and go on about your business. It's a real disappointment and really discourages hiding and playing carefully. The game as a whole would be much more engaging and challenging if they had just designed it with being entirely defenseless. But going back and forth between action horror and survival horror just feels disjointed.
One final note I'll add is that this small section is the only one that utilizes darkness. You get a flashlight to navigate your way through here, but the segment lasts maybe 10 seconds and it shows you how much wasted potential this game had.
Once you finish the game, credits roll and you're sent back to the main menu. You can load up your save and go back through each chapter to get some of the collectibles and achievements you might have missed. There's also a gallery that unlocks and allows you to view models the game uses and gives you a bit of backstory about the game's development. It's a nice little touch I wish more games would implement. The game is roughly 4.5 hours long, which is honestly surprising. I get that it's an indie title, but it doesn't feel like some of that time was well spent. Yeah, there's some scary bits and you have to go through some basic puzzles to solve, but it still feels surprisingly hollow. On the plus side though, you'll be tired of the gameplay loop by the end, so it doesn't feel like it's overstaying its welcome. There were no standout issues with the game itself. None of the enemies got stuck because of pathing, no weird errors or crashes, and it seems to run smoothly. Except while streaming it. For some reason it caused OBS problems in certain areas and I really don't know why. Previous titles I've reviewed are definitely more graphically demanding, and yet I've never encountered any problems recording footage. Beyond that, expect it to run fine during a playthrough on an average PC. As we go through the story, I'm going to try to keep things relevant to the first game without using any references or knowledge that can be found or inferred from other titles, since this is the first of a series. I did address the wiki for things that were just straight up not clear, just for clarification. Now there is a lot of lore here and I'll try to keep things as relevant as much as I can. I'll also say that there's genuinely not much of an in-game story here, but rather world building, which is pretty typical for any game developer who has a good feeling that they can make more than one entry into a series. The things that have happened before the actual game's story are a bit more interesting than the game's plot itself, and that's really okay. Most hints about the world can be either found in audio logs or really just context clues. So to reiterate, I will not be going over things in later titles unless I feel that it makes things easier to understand. If you don't want anything spoiled, go to here. First things first, we have to know what happened in Joey Drew Studios before we actually get to the game's plot. In 1929, Joey Drew, Henry Stein, and others collaborated to produce a series of Bendy cartoons. And only a year later, Henry, our main character, would leave Joey Drew Studios to spend more time with his family. Joey would go on to hire voice talent to keep the Bendy train rolling. Then something quite important happened.
Dann tritt für mich ein, so wie ich für dich eingetreten bin.
During this time, Joey Drew Studios re-released a lot of its earlier cartoons to sell war bonds, and at the same time, it was losing employees left and right due to the draft. As all of this was happening, Joey was planning on the next big thing. Bendyland. This would be the straw that broke the camel's back and caused such a huge financial burden on the studio that it began to decline. By the time 1946 rolled around, Joey Drew Studios was under investigation after reports of hazardous work environments, missing employees, harassment, and excessive back pay, as well as the company's danger of being bankrupt, all of which were due to Joey's mismanagement of the studio. Employees threatened to make labor unions over the poor conditions, which included unpermitted buildings, hazardous electrical wiring, and a plumbing system prone to bursting. In addition, there were excessive work hours, most of which were unpaid, and several animators were unable to see their families in weeks. There were reports of barricaded offices, employees locked up in workspaces, and complaints of crazy malfunctioning machinery. So you can imagine Joey Drew Studios looking like this. In true Walt Disney fashion, Joey Drew disregarded the accusations, stating that they were just complaints. After 2 more years, the studio had finally shut down. Sometime during the studio's height, Joey Drew obtained the ink machine. On the surface, it seems like a machine that processes more ink for the studio to use. Its actual purpose is quite different, however. You see, Joey used the machine to produce mascots for the up-and-coming Bendyland. Joey's first attempt at making a Bendy mascot didn't quite succeed. The result was a soulless husk that sometimes roamed the studio but was mainly kept under lock and key. At some point, Joey realized that in order to create the perfect mascots, a sacrifice had to be made. A person's soul. As you play the game, you'll notice that there's a bit of Lovecraftian mysticism going on. There will be writings on the walls, otherworldly symbols, and some flat-out text that reinforces this idea that something else is up. Now, I couldn't find anything that explicitly stated that employees were all for this, so that's a toss-up. Souls were needed to make the characters look good and not go completely apeshit. This can be seen in some of the more cooperative NPCs throughout the game. As to whether or not these named NPCs are a direct result of a mascot being made with a soul, I'm not entirely sure, but I think it's safe to say that they were. One thing I do like here is that it seems that they went the same route as Soma did. For those of you who don't know, the enemies found throughout that game are, or at least were, normal people before being turned into monsters. I think the same applies here as well. So the named enemies you meet can be a voice actress embodied as the character she voiced, or a projectionist that was turned into the projectionist. Okay, so now you're all caught up. So what happens throughout the events of Bendy and the Ink Machine? Well, after restarting the ink machine in the first chapter, Henry falls through one of the many work hazards at Joey Drew Studios. From here in chapter 2, the game truly starts. You've landed into the music studio, which is the first and really only area where you see some of the Lovecraftian mysticism I was talking about earlier. As you're exploring, you get a feeling that you're being watched. Sammy Lawrence is, or at least was, the composer for the Bendy films, and you're in his turf. So you have to do your best solving puzzles before you...
Rest your head. It's time for bed. There we go now, nice and tight. We wouldn't want our sheep roaming away now, would we?
Sammy here has been worshipping what other characters refer to as the Ink Demon, otherwise known as Bendy. The ink demon was the first attempt at making a Bendy mascot before Joey figured out that the ink machine required souls. He's supposed to be the main antagonist of the game, but he shows up so infrequently that he's hardly a threat. After running away from Bendy, you meet a new character.
Boris?
Boris is to Bendy what Goofy is to Mickey. He really serves no purpose other than to be some sort of set dressing. Either way, he's with you through parts of Chapter 3. This is where you'll meet another new character.
Now we come to the question. Do I kill you? Do I tear you apart to my heart's delight? The choices of the beautiful are unbearable.
Alice Angel controls the elevator that leads out of the studio and tasks you with several fetch quests before she'll allow you to leave. You know, more video game bullshit. During these segments, it's hinted that Bendy is on the hunt, and in all actuality, he's mainly absent, only showing up because of either a random timer or because of a scripted event. After finding various objects, she finally lets you and Boris leave. Come on, you knew better. Chapter 4 tasks you with rescuing your one and only friend in this hellhole. It's also the only chapter that feels way more fleshed out than any other. This is where you find the makings of Bendyland. A lot of the attractions here are still functional thanks to its perfectionist of a creator, Bertram Piedmont. Eventually, you find him in Bendyland. And kill him. After dealing with that nightmare, you find a functional ride that leads you to where Alice is keeping Boris hostage.
Boris! No, what has she done to you?
One thing I was not expecting was a boss fight. This is one of the things I was talking about earlier when I said that the game would have been better with no ways to defend yourself. Instead, here you do a thing 3 times and the boss dies. Chapter 5 starts out with you meeting 2 new characters that are more set dressing than anything. After creeping through some offices, avoiding some monsters whenever you can, you find Bendy's lair and head inside.
It's simply awe-inspiring what one can accomplish with their own hands. A lump of clay can turn to meaning if you strangle it with enough enthusiasm. Look what we've built. We created life itself, Henry. Not just on a silver screen, but in the hearts of those we entertain with our fancy moving pictures. But when the tickets stopped selling, when the next big thing came along, only the monsters remain. Shadows of the past. But you can save them, Henry. You can peel it all away. There's only one thing Bendy has never known. He was there for his beginning, but he's never seen the end.
After a very brief boss fight, you're treated to the ending.
Henry, so soon. I didn't expect you for another hour yet. Now you're just trying to impress me. But I know. You have questions. You always do. The only important question is this. Who are we, Henry? I thought I knew who I was. But the success starved me. Nothing left but lines on a page. In the end, we followed two different roads of our own making. You, a lovely family. Me, a crooked empire. And my road burned. I let our creations become my life. The truth is, you were always so good at pushing, old friend. Pushing me to do the right thing. You should have pushed a little harder. Henry, come visit the old workshop. There's something I need to show you.
All right, Joey. I'm here. Let's see if we can find what you wanted me to see.
What? Like I said before, there's really no story and it's more about world building. Is Bendy and the Ink Machine a good game? While it does sell what it's going for pretty damn well, it can't hold itself up on the art style alone. The horror the game presents with is so back and forth between either being helpless or being slightly inconvenienced, and it's suffering from an identity crisis because of this. If they had stuck to a more helpless horror experience the entire way through, I think it would have been much more enjoyable. The world they've created is fun and sets up the sequels pretty well, but overall the game just isn't impressive. Should you give it a try? I honestly can't recommend that you play Bendy and the Ink Machine. You'll finish the game feeling disappointed rather than feeling relieved that the nightmare is over. If you plan on playing the entire series, I don't see a reason why you shouldn't play this one, but it'll feel more like you're playing it because you have to as opposed to wanting to. Bendy and the Ink Machine rode the hype train that Five Nights at Freddy's started. Even though at its core it's not a very fun or engaging game, it's set up to do so much more, and I'm excited to see what the sequels have up their sleeves.